Okay, that's our signal to get going. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Welcome to this update on Ngā Upoko Tukutuku. You're going to hear this afternoon from a group of us who belong to Te Whakakaokao, the working group for the headings. We've also got Celia Jo and me, who are members of the governance group, and also present online and kind of in person, Catherine and Charlotte, who are our wonderful cataloguing supporters. So to get us started, I'm going to hand over to Rukuwai.
Tīkina atu rā te pūtake o ngā kōrero I te wānanga. Tīkina atu rā te hautapu o ngā ariki. Kauwhatatia e tāne te wānanga ki runga ki e nei e mene mai nei. Kia koe te matapūnenga, maiangi te matapu iho ka whakamaua I kia tēnā. Tēnā. Hui e tāi. Ko tā te pipi wharau roa he koro tiu, ko tā te tui he mimiro, ko tā te kereru he kūkū, ko tā te tangata he kōrero, koia nei au ka whakatū whera I tō tātou hui topa I a koutou I tēnei rā. E kaha tangi ana ki ngā tini aitua kua wehe atu rā, ko tētahi e kia ne ko Robin East, te manu tiu, I ngaro I te tirohanga tātou, haere hoki atu rā. Kia tātou I tā tūro, nei rā ngā mihi kia koutou I tēnei. My name is Hemi Rukuwai Juri. In the north, I'm known as Hemi. In Kahumundu, I'm known as Rukuwai, and in Tūhoia, I'm known as Boy. I work at Ngāti Whātua Orake as the Archives and Collections Manager. My brief mihi there included mihi to Robin East, who worked with Te Whakakaokao. I only met her once, but she was a lovely lady. In the week that coincides with Anzac Day, it's important that we remember. As Māori, we take the time in all of our occasions to remember those that have gone before us. The same as on Anzac Day, we do the same on Matariki. When we do our karakia, we remember all those that have gone in the year before. And this is important for us, and especially in my new role as the archivist for Ngāti Whātua Orake, we spend a lot of time remembering. When I first began working in libraries, my job was indexing a lot of Māori television and Māori shows that were on television. So that included Te Karere, Wakahuia, all of Māori television. So my job when I started around about 2004, I only had about 6 shows to describe. Then Māori television started and I had about 12 hours a day worth of work to do and no way to keep up with it. So we tried the best way we could think of to minimize the amount of work that had to be done. And this metadata, Māori subject headings at the time, I thought would be a really great thing. When I first heard about it, I imagined that it was going to be aligning all of the Māori gods and atua, lining them all up and then having everything in the universe come out of all of them. And it wasn't until I joined Te Whakakaokao that I found how wrong I was. It would have been nice, but I don't think that even Māori can do that at the moment. So creation of the thesaurus helped me in that work understand just what was important and how we describe things. The Western theories allow searches to be conducted in a manner that refines and reduces information down to a few or often a single piece of information. And I think the Māori subject headings and current Māori metadata practices help us do that. Māori traditionally would use song, genealogy, speech, karakia to embed the information for transmission from experts to novices. And learning aids for that process were things like geographical features, stars, winds, tides, the elaborate tattoos that we have, decorative carving, painting, weaving, hunting, all of those kinds of things. And we've had to try and figure out how we align those two types of practices, especially in industry like libraries and archives. Can I get you to change the slide, please? While there's still a lot of work ahead to normalize te reo in archives, libraries, and repositories, we still come a long way. If you can imagine that if you go into an archive, a library, or a repository with a research inquiry relating to mātauranga Māori, you can find stuff on that now. But that wasn't always the case. 20 years ago, if you did a search using Māori terms like waka, you wouldn't gain any joy. To find waka, you'd need to look under the unfamiliar, demeaning, and sometimes misleading Library of Congress subject heading terms such as canoes or canoeing. Taonga were referenced through the term Māori, New Zealand people, and antiquities, while tikanga could be described through broad terms such as Māori, New Zealand people, social life and customs. Even right up until this year, Library of Congress subject headings didn't use macrons. So pūrākau and whakapapa could only be represented as Māori, New Zealand people, and folklore. Similarly, poi and haka were categorized as forms of folk dancing for Māori. For those of you who witnessed Te Matatini, just have a think about how much of that struck you as folk dancing. Subject headings will help us remember many things, but I'll leave my colleagues to share some of what those are, and I'd like to hand over to Wayne, please. Kia ora tātou.
You're on mute.
Thank you, CJ. I'll start again. Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi nui tēnei ki a koutou. Ko Raewyn Paiwai tōku ingoa no Rangitānei ahau. I am a member of Te Whakakaokao working group, and I'm currently working alongside Ngāti Tamaoho Trust in Karaka, Papakura, to create their library and archive system. So I talked a little bit about how far we've come, and we truly have come a long way, but how did we get there? So basically the foundational work included the research projects Te Ara Tika, Māori and Libraries, and Te Ara Tika Guiding Voices, Māori Opinion on Libraries and Information Needs. These projects identified popular Māori terms, which led to many initiatives such as creating an iwi list, and of course, Ngā Upoko Tukutuku, an internationally recognised Indigenous thesaurus. The thesaurus is a joint project between Te Rōpū Whakahau, LIANZA, and the National Library. It began in 1998 with the creation of the Māori subject headings party, and was developed through the dedicated work of many people, including the late Rangiiria Headley, and as Rukuwai spoke, Robin Eastley, who sadly has just passed. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the original team, as you can see in this picture, Whinata Few, Anne Anderson, Judy Keats, and Anne Rewiti. And over time, the many committed people who have supported and participated in the continued growth of Ngā Upoko Tukutuku. The thesaurus reflects a partnership approach and was launched in 2005. Kia ora, Catherine. There were many Indigenous data models considered in the development of Ngā Upoko Tukutuku, but the challenge was to find a framework that incorporated a Te Ao Māori and a cataloguing worldview. And this was not as easy as we thought. The research confirmed to the team that whakapapa, or genealogy, was a common Māori philosophy, and its origin came from a source, Io. Io extended their mana from the nothingness, te kore, to create a universe from the dark, te pō, and so the physical universe was created, te ao marama. When applied to Ngā Upoko Tukutuku, we recognise both the traditional and contemporary dimensions of the world we live in, which is te tinana, te wairua, and te hinengaro. If it therefore moves away from the Eurocentric model to meet points of need and growth, it provides subject access to all kinds of information resources relating to Māori through a mātauranga Māori lens, rather than that Eurocentric lens. Kia ora, Kath. So it's not a dictionary of translation, but an Indigenous data model based on a whare structure. So that when we relate the thesaurus structure to the whare, we use terms relevant to a Te Ao Māori view. That is, we start with a kaupapa or a main term. We use the tāhuhu to represent broader terms, the heke for narrower terms, tukutuku for used for terms, kaho for related terms, and reo a iwi for tribal dialectal terms. It uses languages and concepts familiar to Te Reo Māori speakers and researchers. So, for instance, as Rooks was speaking about earlier, when searching a catalogue, you are able to use kupu Māori such as whakairo instead of carving. It enables terms and records to be shared nationally and internationally. It gives equal weight and acknowledgement to reo a iwi terms, so that those living in, say, Te Waipounamu, for example, can use moka for maunga, for mountains, instead of maunga as is commonly used in the North Island. And we do recognise that it's important for people living in different tribal areas to find the reo of that area and use those within their systems. Therefore, Ngā Upoko Tukutuku is continually evolving as language evolves. Kia ora koutou, so I'm now going to pass it over to Dale.
Thanks, Raywin. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou ko Dale Cousens aho, he kaimahi aho o te puna mātauranga o Aotearoa, i te taho o tōki papa ko Ngā Ruahine te iwi. I'm a member of the governance group of Ngā Upoko Tukutuku, holding the role for National Library as part of the partnership that provides this. So carrying on from Raywin, the thesaurus is created by Te Whakakaokao, the working group. At the moment, this is a small group for people of reo and mātauranga experts, as well as our two Pākehā cataloguers, Charlotte and Catherine, and the members of the governance group, Anahira Moyahu, CJ Olsen, and myself, representing LIANZA, Te Whakakaokao, and the National Library. We regularly meet through Day Long Hui, at the moment conducted on Zoom, and oversight is provided, oversight of the work is provided by the governance group, who I've just introduced before. While the group may seem small, each person brings a community based on personal experience and rich networks. Emails, texts, and phone calls fly out to every corner of Te Ao Māori. Phoning a friend is a fantastic way to work, drawing on deeper collective wisdom of Indigenous communities. Ngā Upoko Tukutuku looks backwards and forwards, constantly evolving as language evolves. There is a growing focus on archival, multimedia, and unpublished collections, as well as published materials encompassing a variety of descriptive practice. Te reo publishing is growing and expanding. New terms are continually created and existing terms clarified or restructured, reflecting changes in usage, language, and events. The terminology of Ngā Upoko Tukutuku reflects language that is used rather than demanding that people learn new or unfamiliar terminology. And I'm now going to hand over to CJ to give us some examples.
Tēnā tātou, I'm Celia and I'm part of the governance group representing Te Ropi Whakahau, and I'm from Ngāti Kahungunu ki te Wairua. So in this year's March Hui, we clarified the terms awha and marangai. Sadly, these terms are highly relevant in the context of Huripari Gabriel and the recent floods. We have recently created new terms ranging from puoro pioo, which is heavy metal, to Petihana Reo Māori, which is the 1972 Māori land, a language petition, and mātauranga, which is data sovereignty. We have new concepts as well, concepts which are not so much new, but have re-emerged within new contexts. For example, praikete. Simple isn't always simple. A seemingly straightforward request led to amazingly complex discussions. It was easy to identify praikete as an appropriate term for blanket, but where does praikete actually fit and what are the ramifications? Praikete have many meanings, obviously representing bedding and shelter, also clothing. But what about political statements? For example, wearing a grey blanket with the red stripe and the black watch tartan, often seen and worn in Waikato. There are also brutal histories of blankets handed out that were infected with diseases like smallpox, and these were handed out to Māori. Anyhow, we try our best, not always successfully, to avoid going down rabbit holes while dealing with the materials in front of us. We try to limit the scope of terms to fit the materials that are being described and the resources in which the terms are grounded, as it is very important to understand the context of the terms requested. Also, reo aiwi, dialectual or regional language, hold equal weight and may be used as the preferred terms in some context. Requests for terms associated with COVID-19 resonated with the 1918 influenza pandemic. There were many conversations around terms such as isolation and border controls. So a request for a term for iwi checkpoints raised many questions like, what are border controls from a Māori perspective? How do these represent community and hapu and sometimes police involvement, especially where there is historically little reason to trust the police? How do these contexts reflect mātauranga Māori views like rāhui and aukati? What is the concept the user wishes to find? From our discussions, a term emerged, aukati rori, but as the kōrero continues, so does the abundance of other things that come in. So wherever you work, Ngā Upoko Tukutuku is here to support you in terms of describing resources relating to Te Ao Māori. Karawe, I will now hand it back to Dale.
So there are many ways that you can engage with the work of Ngā Upoko Tukutuku. You can put terms forward, put requests forward for terms if you are working with material and wish to put a Ngā Upoko Tukutuku heading on it and can't find one that's appropriate. You can ask for an appropriate term to be developed. You can attend Tukua, which is the marae-based workshop that's run between LIANZA and Te Whakakaokao. I think we've just had one. We've got one coming up. Keep an eye out on the message boards for those programs. That will give you an opportunity to have a bit of a deeper dive into Ngā Upoko Tukutuku in an appropriate environment on the marae. You can ask to sit in on a Te Whakakaokao hui, and we always welcome having visitors around the table. to see how we work and how those terms are developed and what those conversations are like. You can download the data set and have a play around with the data that sits behind these terms. If you have specialist knowledge, particularly in Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Māori, we would be really interested in you joining the work. Te Whakakaokao seeks contributors, particularly, as I said, with Te Reo and Te Ao Māori, but also Reawa iwi, so iwi dialects, who can contribute possibly through forming a regional or workplace-based group to carry out some of that development of terms in-house and then put them forward to Te Whakakaokao as new requests with some of the work already done. There's going to be a handout sent round to everyone who's attended today with an overview of the information that's been presented as part of the webinar, particularly the structural, the thesaurus structure and that kind of information, as well as some key links and further reading. I'm now going to hand back to Celia to do our closing karakia, and we'll then open the floor for questions.
Anō reira tēnā tātou, pauhihiringi, paurarama, tiaho i roto, mārama i roto, tēnā te pau ko te pau kaieke, nā te pau wenei kōrero, ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira, kia puta ki te whae ao ki te ao marama, hui te ora, hui te marama, haumi e, hui e, taiki.
Taiki e. Kia ora koutou. We are, I think, monitoring questions.
And Charlotte has.
And Charlotte is. If you have a question, put it in the chat. If we can't answer straight away, we will note it down and get back to you.
You could also raise a hand if you wish to. I will direct if I see anyone's hand up.
Don't be scared.
Yeah, we're nice, we're friendly.
And if questions come up later, you can always send them through tereo@dia.gov.nz.
Yeah.
And the details will be in the handout that's being sent round.
Yeah.
Got one comment that isn't a question, but this looks very interesting. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Gar. As we said, the site Ngā Upoko Tukutuku is available on the National Library website. If you just Google Ngā Upoko Tukutuku, you will find it. And you can go and have a play in the thesaurus. It is specifically designed to support people with no te reo Māori, so you don't have to have any te reo skills to be able to navigate your way through. That's the aim. So if you want to go and have a play, as I said, download the data set if that's your kind of thing, and have a play with that. Yeah.
And if you see any terms that are missing, concepts that should be there but aren't, please do send them through.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Yes. Oh. Even though the word,
Sorry, Kath, I just wanted to add, now I've moved from working from research libraries into working with iwi, and the great thing about having the thesaurus is that I'm cataloguing the material as it comes, as we have it there, using kupu Māori, and working alongside the iwi, I'm able to ask them, what terms that they would use and are these recognisable to them. So it's been a real benefit. And I can recall many years ago, a lecturer from Wellington Uni was commenting, we happened to be talking to them about our mahi, and he didn't even realise at that time that you couldn't search the catalogue using kupu Māori. And that's why it's really amazing to me that people don't realise you couldn't use kupu Māori. And so that just goes to show how far we've come. There's so much work being done into it that when we first started way back in the 80s and 90s, we had so much trouble, and now people just take it as it's normal. You can search using kupu Māori now, and I think that's the best thing that's come out of it.
Yeah, we are also we haven't caught up with all of the presents yet, but the term subject headings is disappearing, and we are using metadata. So Ngā Upoko Tukutuku absolutely started in the library space as subject headings, but is expanding, as Raewyn has said, into other types of collections. And so we are replacing that with Māori metadata, because that is really what it is, and it is applicable across many different types of descriptive practice. And so we're really keen, if you're working in a space that's not a library as such, for you to have a try using the terms, contribute to the work, request terms. It is absolutely for everyone who's working in any kind of descriptive practice. Yeah. So
there are a couple of questions here in the chat, Dale. The first one from Eb is possibly more of a group question. Even though the world views are different, has work been done in retrospectively adding subject headings to older records?
Everyone's practice is different. If you're using Upoko Tukutuku at your place and a new term is released, then you may choose to go back and do that retrospective work. At National Library, I think it's a bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, there was a summer internship with a student from Te Ao who went through a specific collection, added in Ngā Upoko Tukutuku. There have been various other projects to add specific terms in, but it needs something much bigger and more comprehensive, really. Yeah.
And I know that when Charlotte was working for Manukau Libraries, we did quite a good project on retrospectively adding material. And I think Finita Few did quite a bit of work as well. So it's almost like each library, or those people who are dedicated in the kaupapa, have taken it upon themselves to work on little bits of areas retrospectively. And that's played a big part, I reckon. So it's not as if we have those resources to make that happen continuously, but people are picking it up or have picked it up. So it's been awesome.
Yeah.
Question from Garth here. Do you think that this format can or will be used for other dictionaries and thesaurus going forward?
It's certainly a good foundation for other people working in Indigenous metadata, because it's functional. We've been working, as Raewyn has shared, this has been out there and operating for quite some time. It's accepted by the Library of Congress as a thesaurus in their network of data. And so it's absolutely a structure that other people can use. I think there's been a few conversations with other Indigenous communities, and the recommendation has always been you find the foundational kaupapa pattern that works for you. So for us, it is that triangle of Io, Te Kore, Te Po, Te Ao Māori and the whare structure. And so we encourage other Indigenous groups not just to lift that and put it in their environment, because it might not be their thing, but to take that pattern of using an Indigenous structure to map to your metadata and whatever that looks like in your space. Yeah.
And I think, with speaking in several countries around the world on Ngā Upoko Tukutuku, some of the comments made were that they were, a lot of the Indigenous cultures were at that stage of going through that loss of language. And so seeing what we have done has really inspired them to want to do something for themselves. I think one of the hard parts is for them was that they don't have associations like we do in terms of Te Rōpū Whakahau. So if you think 20 odd years ago now, Te Rōpū Whakahau was pushing for this, and it took us a long time, and they're at the stage where they want to build a type of Te Rōpū Whakahau, so that's really what's holding them back. But ideally, I know from talking to many Indigenous people that they want to build something similar. It's just trying to get there really.
There's a lot of work happening in Hawaii, isn't there?
Yes.
Constructing an Indigenous ontology.
Yeah. And there's been there's classification systems that are out there, Indigenous classification systems, slightly different to descriptive metadata, but working in the same space. Yeah.
Tracy asks, is there a simple way to find out who or which libraries, archives, etc. use Ngā Upoko Tukutuku?
Short answer is no. There was some work done by LIANZA a few years ago and there's a list of libraries who were using Ngā Upoko Tukutuku and the work that Melissa Bryant did in her thesis. So you can definitely send out links to those.
We basically released the data set into the wild, and after that, what I can say is that it pops up in the most interesting places. I was in a conversation with colleagues from National Library of Australia, and they have not the entire data set, but they have records with Ngā Upoko Tukutuku headings in their catalogue simply because they take the National Library of New Zealand records and don't strip anything. So if people are in that following that type of practice, then the headings will by default start filtering into their system, whether they're actively adding them or not.
Yeah. I think an ongoing issue is to talk to iwi libraries as well, because we don't subscribe to Te Puna. So we wouldn't download records from there. And if you didn't have people like myself who are using or cataloguing using Māori Ngā Upoko Tukutuku, then it probably wouldn't happen. But, so there might be some other conversations later on about how can we help iwi. Yeah.
And there are more and more iwi archives and other repositories that are starting up. And so, yes, engaging actively with that community is going to be more and more important. Yeah.
Question from Rupawai, probably for Catherine. Is the downloadable content updated regularly?
Yes, it is. It was just updated this week, actually. So, whenever there is a new update of newly created Ngā Upoko Tukutuku terms, then the data sets are also updated. There are two forms of them. There is all the terms in the thesaurus, or you can just get a subset of the new and changed terms, which may be more manageable. There are 3 different mark formats, and there's also an XML format. So, if you go to our open data page and explore, you can really download those data sets. Yeah.
There's a couple of other comments, but there's a question from Ashley. Is there a way to see what other contexts, definitions, dialectal differences have been considered when choosing or creating the specific kupu?
At the moment, no. That's correct, isn't it?
No, it's more on an ad hoc basis.
That's a function of a couple of things. One is the way that the work actually happens. Charlotte and Catherine do a phenomenal job of keeping track of really wide-ranging and complicated conversations that can go over months and months, and in some cases years, before we settle on a term. But that's held in a closed document that's only really accessible to a tiny group of people. I don't think even I've got access to it, not that I want to. But it does mean that they can do a deep dive into the backstory if needed. And part of the restriction around that is the systems that we currently have access to actually do this work. Yeah. Celia.
Can I just add? Yes. So I talked about the word praikete for blanket. That's been, we still have not quite resolved that yet. It's been in our sites for, I don't know, 8 years. And it seems like an easy concept. It's a blanket. So is it a shelter? You know, it's such a big discussion that you may, Ashley, you may get a feel for it if you come to a whakakaokao hui when we do discuss wānanga, the kupu, and then you'll see how difficult it is, because in a Western tirohanga, you would see a blanket and go, oh yeah, it's a blanket, but in Māoridom it's like, oh, it's a rabbit hole with so many picker side things that it's quite eye-opening, I guess, for those who don't quite understand mātauranga Māori.
Just to add on to CJ's kōrero, so sometimes the kupu is the easiest part of the process. And then, you know, following that, it comes to context. But then after that, it's like, where does the kupu fit in terms of the hierarchy of Ngā Upoko Tukutuku? Because everything, as we've talked about, there's a whakapapa to the kupu. So where would paraikete sit in terms of its whakapapa? If we're saying it's a blanket, then that's bedding. But if we're saying it's got this political context, then where does that sit in terms of the hierarchy? It's no longer, you know, can we put it in both? Well, these are the discussions that we have. So sometimes it's not just coming up with the kupu, but it's where does it sit in our whakapapa context within the thesaurus itself. And that can take a long time and a lot of debating and a lot of arguing. Nice arguing, and that's when the stories come, you know, and that's the great part about being on the team, is the stories that come with the kupu. So we're looking also at its traditional use, because sometimes that has changed over time, and ata mira is an example of how the kupu has changed. And so sometimes it's looking at its traditional use and then looking at its contemporary use, and then sort of seeing what the tamariki are using in kura kaupapa as well. So we take all that into our view, and then try to come up with, you know, the best possible solution we can. But that, as CJ's pointed out, sometimes takes 8 years, might take longer. Well, we always say, when we say, let's just pick something simple, and we'll pick a simple one, that usually turns out to be the longest and hardest one. So we need to stop saying that.
And if I can just tack on to that, one of the joys for me with no Maori background, but being present for the kōrero, is those moments where you think you can see where something's going, and then everyone in the group goes, oh no, that's not that simple. And it's that opening up of the fact that actually I need to know that information. If I'm describing something and I'm using that word, it's going to be interpreted in more ways than I thought of, and I need to know that. And that's the kind of thing that we can put across in the thesaurus, and that is joyful work to me. Back to the chat. Eb asks, has thought been given to adding the thesaurus to Wikidata given system constraints? Shall I answer that one? Or essentially no, not Wikidata. The thesaurus structure is somewhat complex, both in terms of giving rewa iwi terms equal weight within the same language. A lot of thesaurus software will allow you to have terms of equal weight in different languages, but it struggles with the same language. Wikidata is not one we have looked at closely, although we could do. But between the language issue, and the fact that while we are moving beyond just libraries, our library users still need mark data. We are constrained in that way. And for those who haven't noticed, Catherine has put a link to the research paper she mentioned before in the chat. Have I missed anyone's question?
I don't think so.
There are time for more if you're still typing.
Hi there, my name's Erin and I am the Knowledge Manager at Minter Ellison Rudd-Watts law firm. This is a really interesting session, so thank you. I'm really glad this is on today. I'm wondering if there's any university libraries that are using this. We've got a small law library collection and we're really working hard to build our Te Ao Māori and Te Reo collection because law firms have a lot of work to do in that area, and it's good to see that there's new titles being purchased, but we I guess we have a variety of resources that a variety of titles that we're purchasing. Is there, so it would be different from, say, a public library collection? Is there?
Can I leap in on this one? I believe it was about 2 years ago, we were approached by a cataloger working for the Ministry of Justice who was doing some work in this area. So alongside the universities who are, I'm aware, and there will be people here who can talk to that, universities are certainly using it. There are also libraries in the legal space.
Oh, great. Okay, I will, I'm president of the Law Librarians Association, so I'll speak to my members about that because, yeah, we would love to talk more about this too. So thank you, and I'll reach out to MOJ as well. Thank you.
And if you find gaps, and this is true for anyone here, if you find gaps for your area that you want to describe something and there just isn't a word, that's the perfect time to put the request in. You have the resource you're trying to describe. You may not know what it is you want to say, but you know the concept. Put it through as a request. And I see Skulk has said, Erin, Victoria University of Wellington is using Ngā Upoko Tukutuku through copy cataloguing.
Oh, super. Cool.
Which Otago
Thank you very much.
as well, who've got strong law.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was going to say that National Library, of course, has legal deposit. And so if it's published in New Zealand, I'm not saying 100% we will be receiving a copy, but we should be receiving a copy. And it would be catalogued with Ngā Upoko Tukutuku headings if that's appropriate. So it might take a little while to pop up, but that's potentially another source.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate everyone sharing. That's what I love about libraries. So thank you, Jordan.
We run out of puff. Friday afternoon. Okay. You have our email address, and as I said, Catherine, we're going to get an information sheet to Anna so that she can share it with everyone who attended or maybe registered and didn't quite make attending. And our contact details will also be on that. And I might, if it's okay, off the cuff, ask either Rukawai or Celia to close us finally with a karakia.
I can do it again, folks. I will use the same one. How about that? Because
Still appropriate.
still appropriate. So, tēnā tātou. Pauhihiri, paurarama, te aho I roto, mārama I roto. Tēnei te pau, ko te pau kaeke, nā te pau wenei kōrero, ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira. Kia puta ki te whaiao ki te ao marama, hui te ora, hui te marama, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e.
Kia ora, CJ.
Kia ora. Kia pai tō rā ko